Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. And this time, we are tackling, I think, maybe one of the most enigmatic figures in music history,
Absolutely.
Colonel Tom Parker, the man behind Elvis Presley. And we've got some pretty fascinating source material for this one, firsthand accounts from someone very close to Elvis. So
Right.
incredibly valuable perspective. But it does add a layer of, I guess you could say, personal interpretation.
Yeah, definitely.
So we're going to really try to separate the man from the myth here, the facts from the speculation, and see what we can really learn about the Colonel and his impact on Elvis's career.
That's right. And it is a challenge because he is almost a larger than life figure, you know? He's
Yeah.
become almost like a mythical character in a way. So it's hard to separate fact from fiction.
Exactly. It's like trying to piece together a puzzle where some of the pieces might be a little bit,
Embellished.
yeah, exaggerated, shall we say.
Right?
But that's what makes this so fascinating, right?
Thank you, guys.
So let's rewind the clock a bit. Who was Colonel Tom Parker before he became the Colonel, the man behind Elvis Presley?
Well, his story starts actually far from the bright lights of Las Vegas. He was born Andreas Cornelis van Kuyk in the Netherlands in 1909.
Okay.
And what's really interesting is he comes to the U.S. As a young man, 17, 18 years old. And it seems that he may have actually come here illegally.
Wait, so Elvis's manager, this mastermind of, American entertainment, wasn't even legally allowed in the country.
Yeah.
Okay, how did he even get involved in music then?
Well, the details are murky, but there are these stories about him working and traveling carnivals in those early days, maybe even as a roustabout, you know? And think about that for a second. The world of carnivals, it's all about spectacle. It's about promotion, grabbing the public's attention.
Right.
Sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's like the perfect trading ground for a future master of hype.
Absolutely.
But the Colonel story gets even more intriguing, right? Because wasn't there some mystery surrounding his military service as well?
Yeah, so that colonel title, it was actually an honorary one given to him by a governor that he had helped with a campaign.
Okay.
He did serve in the U.S. Army, even spent some time in Hawaii, but his service record is complicated, to say the least.
Complicated, okay.
He went AWOL at one point, was later discharged, and there's even mention of a psychosis diagnosis.
Wow, so we're already seeing a pattern here. A man who reinvents himself, adopts a new identity, and really crafts a persona.
Right.
It's almost like Colonel Tom Parker was a carefully constructed character from the very beginning.
Yeah, a self-made man in every sense of the word.
But how does someone go from carnivals and a questionable military past to managing one of the biggest stars in the world?
That's where his business savvy comes in. You know, he really had a knack for it. He started promoting music around 1938-39, managing artists like Hank Snow.
Oh, wow, okay.
And this is a key connection because it's actually through Hank Snow that he meets a young up-and-coming Elvis Presley.
Right, and our source mentions that Elvis and Hank Snow were on the same bill a lot, especially at the Louisiana Hayride.
Uh-huh.
So Parker was already a seasoned player in the music industry by the time he encountered Elvis.
Yeah, very much so.
So what was it about Elvis that made him stand out to the Colonel? I mean, did he just see dollar signs?
Well, I think he saw the raw talent, obviously the charisma, but also the potential for something huge, you know, a cultural phenomenon.
Right.
He orchestrated Elvis's signing with RCA Victor, and this is a crucial moment because it sets the stage for their entire relationship.
Okay.
Elvis had full control over his music, the songs, the arrangements,
Okay.
while Parker managed all the business aspects of promotion and publicity.
So a very clear division from the start. Elvis, the artist, Colonel, the businessman. Was this a recipe for success, or did it eventually become a point of conflict?
Well, that's where the Colonel's past may have come back to haunt him, you know?
Okay.
Our source makes a pretty bold claim saying that Elvis actually knew that the Colonel was in the country illegally,
Wow.
and that this secret was the reason why Elvis never toured internationally.
Hold on. Are you saying that Elvis, this global icon, never performed overseas because of his manager's immigration status? That just seems impossible?
It does sound wild, but our source describes a heated argument between Elvis and the Colonel sometime around 1972-73.
Mm-hmm.
Elvis supposedly confronted him about it, and the Colonel, being the master strategist that he was, came up with a solution, the Aloha from Hawaii concert.
Okay.
This was groundbreaking at the time, broadcast via satellite. It brought Elvis to the world.
Wow. That's pretty ingenious. He couldn't bring Elvis to the world, so I brought the world to Elvis.
Exactly.
But surely that wasn't enough to satisfy Elvis in the long run.
You're right, it wasn't. Our source says that Elvis still dreamed of touring Europe and even tried to buy out the Colonel's contract for a staggering $10 million.
$10 million.
He wanted that freedom. He wanted that international stage, but the deal never went through.
So there's this underlying tension, this power struggle between them.
Yeah, definitely.
But before we get deeper into that, let's talk about the people surrounding the Colonel. Our source mentions several individuals who were central to his life and his career.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's Marie Parker, his first wife, who might have had a son from a previous marriage.
Okay.
Then there's Loanne Miller, his second wife. And we can't forget Bitsy Marie's brother, who worked with the Colonel for a while. And then there's Tom Diskin, a trusted associate, described as very intelligent and fiercely loyal to the Colonel.
Sounds like a pretty interesting mix of personalities. So what kind of insights does our source provide into the Colonel's character, his relationships with these people?
Well, they paint a bit of a contradictory picture. They describe him as incredibly generous and kind,
Okay.
but also capable of being quite intimidating. You know, he had this steely-eyed demeanor, apparently.
So he could charm you one minute and make you sweat the next.
Exactly.
But what about his relationship with Elvis? It sounds like there was genuine affection there, at least in the early days.
Yeah, I think so. Our source claims that the Colonel initially saw Elvis almost like a son. You know, he nurtured his career, protected him from the pitfalls of fame. But as Elvis matured, as their ambitions clashed, that bond seems to have frayed, especially after the conflict over the international touring.
Right. So there's that tension. Again,
Uh,
the personal and the professional intertwined.
Absolutely.
And that's definitely something that we're going to explore how that played out and whether the Colonel ultimately helped or hindered Elvis's career. But we'll get into that a little bit later.
Sounds good.
So stay with us. We're back and still digging into this really fascinating relationship between Colonel Tom Parker and Elvis Presley. And before the break, we were talking about that early bond between them, almost like a father and son.
Right.
But it sounds like things got a lot more complicated as Elvis's career really started to take off.
Yeah, and you know, we need to consider, I think, the whole context of the music industry. Back then in the 50s and 60s,
Yeah.
this was a time when rock and roll was just exploding onto the scene. And the Colonel was right at the forefront of that.
So he was a true pioneer in a lot of ways, navigating uncharted territory.
Yeah.
But wasn't there a lot of exploitation going on back then? I mean, did the Colonel kind of take advantage of Elvis's maybe naivete?
Well, that's a question that historians and fans have been debating for decades.
Right.
And it's impossible to ignore the financial aspects of their partnership. You know, the Colonel was notorious for taking a huge percentage of Elvis's earnings.
Oh, yeah.
Some say as much as 50%.
50%, that's unheard of, even today, for a manager.
Right. It's a lot.
But then again, the Colonel did turn Elvis into this global brand. He secured these really lucrative deals for movies, merchandise appearances. I mean, Elvis was everywhere.
Exactly. And that's the paradox of the Colonel's management style. You know,
Yeah.
He was undeniably brilliant at marketing and promotion. He understood the power of image and spectacle, which he used to create this just whirlwind of hype around Elvis. Just think about those iconic jumpsuits, the elaborate stage shows, the outrageous press conferences. I mean, it was all part of his master plan.
He was like a one-man PR machine.
Absolutely.
But how did Elvis feel about all this? Did he ever push back against the Colonel's control, especially as he matured as an artist?
Well, our source actually tells this story about a tense car ride where the Colonel is subtly trying to pry information from Elvis about his finances and his relationship with his father, Vernon.
Wow.
And it really highlights the Colonel's need for control. You know, this constant maneuvering to kind of stay in the driver's seat.
So it sounds like Elvis was constantly being pulled in different directions by his manager, by his family, by his own ambitions. How did he handle all that pressure?
Well, according to our source, Elvis was very loyal to his family and had a strong inner circle who helped him navigate these challenges.
Yeah.
But it's clear that the Colonel's control over his career caused friction, particularly when it came to touring.
All right, we were talking earlier about the Aloha from Hawaii concert, the Colonel's solution to Elvis wanting to tour internationally.
Right.
But it sounds like that was just a temporary fix.
Yeah.
Did Elvis ever confront the Colonel directly about his need for more creative freedom?
Well, our source doesn't mention any specific confrontations, but they do suggest that Elvis became increasingly frustrated with the limitations that were placed upon him.
Yeah.
I mean, remember, he was a musician at heart. He wanted to connect with audiences worldwide, explore new musical styles, collaborate with other artists, but the Colonel's focus was very much on maintaining that Elvis brand,
Right.
which he saw as intrinsically linked to America.
So it sounds like there was a fundamental disconnect between them.
Yeah.
The colonel, the businessman, focused on maximizing profits,
Hmm.
and Elvis the artist yearning for creative expression. Did this conflict ultimately lead to the downfall of their partnership?
That's tough to say. Their relationship definitely evolved over time, became more strained as Elvis sought more control. But we also can't ignore the Colonel's role in shaping Elvis's early success. He provided guidance, protection, and a real business savvy that Elvis might not have had on his own.
So it's not so black and white. It's a really nuanced story of two very ambitious individuals with different priorities and different visions for the future.
Absolutely.
It makes you wonder how Elvis's career might have unfolded if he'd had a different manager, someone more aligned with his artistic goals.
It's a fascinating thought, isn't it? What if Elvis had been free to tour internationally,
Yeah.
to experiment with different musical styles, to collaborate with other artists? Would he have reached even greater heights?
Right.
Or would he have flamed out without the Colonel's guiding hand?
Yeah, those are questions we can only speculate on. But
Exactly.
they really highlight the impact that managers can have on an artist's career.
Absolutely.
It's such a delicate balance of power and influence. And the Colonel's relationship with Elvis is a prime example of both the benefits and the potential pitfalls of that dynamic.
It is, and it's a dynamic that's still so relevant today.
We see it play out in the music industry all the time.
Yeah.
Artists struggling to balance their creative vision with the demands of the market,
Right.
managers trying to protect their clients while also maximizing their earning potential. So in a way, the Colonel's legacy lives on both in the innovative marketing techniques he pioneered and in the cautionary tale of control and missed opportunities that his story really represents.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it brings us to a crucial question. What was his impact on the music industry as a whole? Did he help shape the way artists are managed and promoted today?
That is a fascinating question, and one that we'll be delving into right after we hear from our sponsors. Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of Colonel Tom Parker. We've talked about his mysterious past, his complicated relationship with Elvis, and now I think it's time to really look at his lasting impact on the music industry.
Right, and as we were saying before the break, the Colonel's methods were sort of innovative and maybe a little bit controlling.
Yeah, he walked that line for sure.
He was operating at a time when the music industry was still trying to figure itself out.
Right.
Rock and roll was this new force, and he saw the potential to really create a star unlike any other.
So he wasn't just managing Elvis. He was almost creating this blueprint for how to create and market a global superstar.
Exactly. And some of his tactics were really groundbreaking. I mean, he understood the power of merchandising
Yeah.
before it was even really a thing. Ellis wasn't just a singer, he was a brand. Lunchboxes, posters, clothing.
Everything. Yeah.
You name it, he had it.
And he even had Elvis starring in all these Hollywood movies. I mean, most of them pretty formulaic,
Right.
but they made a ton of money.
They did, and that was the Colonel's genius.
Yeah.
He recognized that Elvis's appeal went way beyond music.
Right.
He was selling a lifestyle, an image, a fantasy,
That's true.
and he wasn't afraid to exploit that, even if it meant sacrificing some of Elvis's artistic aspirations.
That's the thing about the Colonel that makes him so fascinating and controversial.
Yeah,
He was this master promoter and this incredibly shrewd businessman. But, did all that tight control maybe stifle Elvis's creative growth?
that's a great question, and it's a debate that continues to this day.
Yeah.
Did the Colonel's relentless focus on commercial success ultimately limit Elvis's potential as an artist?
It's hard to know for sure.
Yeah, it's impossible to say for sure, but it's something to think about.
It is. It makes you think, how would the Colonel's approach translate to the music industry today? Because it's a totally different landscape now.
Right.
Streaming services, social media,
Mm-hmm.
a much more fragmented audience.
It's a whole new ballgame, but some aspects of his playbook I think are still relevant.
Okay.
Building a strong brand, creating a compelling image, understanding the power of merchandise and licensing. These are all lessons that modern artists and managers can still learn from.
So even though the Colonel didn't have an Instagram account or a Spotify playlist, you're saying those core principles of marketing and promotion still apply.
Absolutely.
That's pretty amazing.
It is. And, I think there's another key takeaway from the Colonel's story, and that's the importance of that artist-manager relationship.
Yeah.
It's a partnership. You need trust. You need communication. You need a shared vision.
So it's about finding that balance between protecting the artist's interests, but also nurturing their creative spirit. It can't just be about the money.
Exactly. It has to be about the music, too.
Right.
And I think the Colonel, for all his flaws, he genuinely cared about Elvis.
Mhm.
He saw him as a once-in-a-lifetime talent, and he wanted to protect him and guide him to success.
Yeah.
Whether he made all the right decisions along the way, that's debatable. But,
Sure.
their partnership, it was definitely one of the most significant in music history.
No doubt about it.
Yeah.
So as we kind of wrap up our deep dive into the world of Colonel Tom Parker, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from this whole exploration?
I think the most important thing is to remember that history is rarely black and white.
Hmm.
People are complicated, their motivations are layered, their actions have unintended consequences.
Yeah.
The Colonel was a man of contradictions, ambitious, controlling, yet capable of loyalty and affection.
It's true.
And I think his story reminds us to look beyond the surface, grapple with the complexities of human nature.
That's a perfect note to end on. We've explored the life, career, and the legacy of Colonel Tom Parker, a man who really left a huge mark on the world of music.
Absolutely.
He was a visionary, he was a manipulator, a protector, a showman.
All the above.
And his story continues to fascinate and inspire debate all these decades later.
It does, and that's the beauty of these deep dives, isn't it?
Yeah.
We get to peel back the layers of history, challenge our assumptions, and gain a deeper understanding of the forces that shape the world around us.
Absolutely. And we encourage you, our listeners, to keep exploring, delve deeper into the source material, do your own research, and form your own conclusions about the enigma that is Colonel Tom Parker.
Right, and until next time, keep diving deep.
Thanks for listening.